Proportional Response. Book 1, Chapter 21, Part 13, a classically unconventional naval maneuver. Raised Admiral Woomerson, formerly of the Themicking forces, sat aboard his Confederated flagship and busily punched potential vectors and fleet movements into his console, while occasionally looking up at the larger holographic plot which occupied the majority of his bridge. He and his fleet had entered into the most delicate part of the dance with the enemy, where most of them tried to use their fire to control, rather than damage, his fleet. Forcing his fleet's movement a few times didn't matter much, but if they could keep herding him in the same direction long enough, they'd force him to maneuver against the orbital velocities of the planet, and that could leave him a choice between engaging them in a fair fight or giving up on his objective, the star system's inhabited planet, altogether. Still, the Admiral must. Knowing is half the battle, and he knew the enemy's intent because it remained the only option open to them. So it all came down, once again, to who made the fewest mistakes, as so often happens between professionals in any sort of contest. Thankfully, we have made fewer mistakes. So far. Woomerson bit down on a curse as the bridge shuddered beneath him. Not a mistake, but a calculated step into the path of some missiles. Anti-missile defenses took the ordnance out before it got close enough to do serious damage, but not far enough to prevent their explosions from being felt. Overwatch had ended up acting as rearguard to second flight, and he wanted to turn his fleet around and give the Daltons nipping at his heels what for, but knew he had to bide his time. He locked in another firing solution for the rear-facing energy weapons and gave signal to fire. Lights dimmed for a moment as power slammed through the various beam weapons and sent their radiations lashing through the void. The Exultant fleet responded in an instant, and a hard smile crossed the Admiral's face just as fast. They'd made a mistake, and he intended to make them pay for it. All Overwatch capital ships execute Crazy Ivan Plan 3, Lima firing solution. On my mark. He heard the sublight jets of his own ship rumble in protest. They weren't designed to be used when in FTL. He also heard his own flag bridge crew gasp, and then braced themselves as the alternating blue-red alarm lights flashed their warning. Anyone standing grabbed the nearest seat or vertical strap and cranked down on whatever harness they found. If he hadn't been so occupied with the activity of the plot and trying to give his people every possible second to prepare, he might have felt some pride at the professional and instant way they followed the drill. He heard chatter from his ship's bridge and engine room as the captain, without protest, gave the orders to carry out his admiral's insane, theoretically possible but untested in practice, command. He watched the prospective vectors of Lima's solution and waited as long as he dared, then spoke. Crazy Ivan 3 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute and fire. The pitch of the FTL engine reached a tortured whine as energy poured into it, and his engineers overrode half of its safety protocols, ordering it to expand the bubble to a shape its architects never intended, while allowing the bubble to thin, in order to compensate for the expanded size which caused the ship to suddenly slow. The violent change of acceleration caused the ship to buck like a gyro, and the straps pulled several feathers loose even through his spacesuit. But he rode it out and kept his hands on his controls. Then his entire body tried to launch itself out the side of his chair as the fore and aft sublight engines and thrusters slammed the ship into a flat spin that caused the decking and walls themselves to emit ear-splitting squeals of protest. Woomerson grunted at the pain and the promised bruises caused by the straps. But the inertial dampers had to use what precious little energy not being routed to the engines to keep the ship from tearing itself apart, and spared only enough for the crews to keep them from being turned into jelly within their suits. As the snap pivot reached the critical moment, the ship's main cannon pushed a single high-density composite slug, which massed as much as a mid-sized ground vehicle, to near relativistic velocities. The gun protested as well. It had not been designed to be fired with the ship performing a maneuver which the laws of physics gave even odds of ripping the ship in half. It fired, however, as did the main guns of the rest of his capital ships. As the slug left, the cannon inertia slammed him into the opposite side of his command chair, promising an additional set of bruises in the morning, or sooner. The lateral motion ceased after a few moments, which slammed him back the other way again, and then the protesting from various ship systems died down as the FTL bubble shrank back to normal size and settled properly around the ship. Alarm klaxons of various kinds went off, and his communications officers began to take and relay damage reports from his large ships. The Admiral glanced at them with half an eye, noted the lack of the codes which signified serious injuries or damage, and kept his attention focused on the plot as the Altons made another critical mistake. Everyone knew that the main gun on human capital ships couldn't fire backwards. In fact, only the Penigra had ships with that ability, and even then it took a lot of effort for their crews to switch firing directions. So, the Zoltan commander had to have looked at his plot and been unable to believe that the humans had fired their main cannons at his pursuit fleet and called for confirmation of the readings before he reacted. That reaction cost him, and cost him dear. Seconds ticked by as the fleet continued to drive straight into the path of his high-density slugs. Each second caused the hard smile on the Admiral's face to widen a little more. When the Zoltan ships finally did respond, they'd waited too long. They had to cut their FTL drives and scatter to keep out of the slug's path. Even that response, however, came too late for one ship. It takes time for an FTL envelope to dissolve and drop a ship back to sublight speeds, and it takes longer for larger ships. One of the pursuing capital ships, the one which had been put at the spearhead of the pursuit force, did not manage to shed its speed fast enough, nor could it maneuver enough. One of the slugs impacted the port bow of the ship. Wimmerson resisted the urge to zoom in and watch the slug disintegrate against the hull. A small cry of triumph went up through the flag bridge as that ship began to lose pace with its fellows. Then the little dot which represented it winked out. The Admiral blinked in surprise. "Must have hit closer to the core of the ship than I thought. Excellent, one less problem to deal with in a few days." In addition to the unexpected bonus of an enemy dreadnought's destruction, the volley of fire had the intended effect. The rest of the enemy fleet, the ones which managed to slow themselves or veer away from the incoming volley, found themselves on vectors which had no chance of closing into weapons range again before Overwatch, much less First Flight, reached the planet. The Admiral had to fight to keep his breathing steady as he studied the enemy commander's next move. Here lies the moment of truth. Do they think we intend to knock them off the planet now, or have they guessed our true intentions? His concern mostly lay with First Flight and their course. Sending them to a point in space so far from the planet could be seen as a dead giveaway that he intended to do a flyby of the planet, not stay and fight over it. Of course, that maneuver could also be misconstrued as an intent to have First Flight take up a reverse direction orbit around the planet. His concerns proved to be needless. The Dalton ships cleared the volley of fire and resumed course for the planet at a speed which had to be redlining their engines and pushing their crews into their seats. No cheers went up from the flag bridge this time, but the Admiral heard several people, including himself, let out held breath. The enemy commander hoped to give him as short a time as possible over the planet to reinforce his own troops and set his position, which meant they'd never even be in range of either of his planet-bound fleets. The hours between the brief exchange with the Alton fleet and coming into range of the token force left at the planet wore on everyone's nerves. Both Sultan forces continued attempts to herd his two fleets, but they remained under the mistaken impression that he intended to occupy the planet and would be forced to slow his ship soon. He sent out his own volleys of fire every so often, just to keep the enemy honest, as his captains seemed fond of saying. A few of the shots managed to score minor hits on the enemy, but not enough to do more than force the ship to choose between slowing and recharging their shields, or risking serious damage if they took another hit. None of the Zoltan ships slowed. Tension built as it had before, and the Admiral considered trying out the singing thing once more, but decided against it as his eyes, again, measured the distance on the plot between their current position and the point of truth past which the Zoltan fleet would not be able to turn inside his prospective course around the planet and attempt to cut off his fleets on their way out of the system. He just needed the Zoltan commander to fail to realize the real tactics for a few hours more, for a few minutes more, for a few seconds more. His navigator's voice rang out over FleetCom. Passing the point of truth in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sultan fleet will no longer have the ability to alter course enough to pursue us out of the system, sir. Overwatch fleet, prepare to alter course on the Admiral's command. Woomerson took a look at the plot, then at the various numbers scrolling on his screen. Well done, Nav. All ships of Overwatch fleet, we have the luxury of being able to provide close support to second flight. Prepare to make course alterations in 1 hour. I'm sending you the updates now. The view on the plot changed. The original course for Overwatch, which called for the course change any moment now, faded to a dim line, and a new one, far closer to the planet, lit up. We will still be at extreme range, but that is close enough to harass the small garrison force which has been left in orbit. When we get there, I want you to remember, your job is to support and protect second flight, not to destroy the enemy. If you get a clear chance to do real damage, then, of course, by all means take it. But I expect you to take no risks. Be conservative with your fire, and concentrate on making sure our lower altitude forces are able to do their jobs. Acknowledgements came back from all Overwatch ships, then, almost belatedly, from second flight. Woomerson nodded to himself and settled in to wait a little longer. The trip through planetary orbit felt almost like an anticlimax. When Overwatch altered course to pass on the opposite side of the planet from second flight, the Zoltan commander surprised him by doing something both intelligent and preservational of Zoltan life by slowing the pursuit fleet and ordering pursuit fleet, planetary support fleet, to get clear.